I didn't disappear all at once. That's what makes this harder to explain. There was no moment when I packed a bag or walked out the door or decided to start over. If anything, I stayed exactly where I was. And that's how it happened. People think disappearance looks like escape. Like distance. Like dramatic change. Mine looked like presence. I showed up. I answered messages. I fulfilled expectations. And slowly, quietly, I erased myself from the inside. At first, it felt harmless. Even responsible. I learned early that being low maintenance made life easier. For others and for me. If I didn't ask for much, I didn't risk disappointment. If I didn't express conflict, I didn't create tension. If I didn't insist on my own needs, I could move through life smoothly. So I adapted. I adjusted my tone. I edited my opinions. I softened my reactions until they became acceptable everywhere. People described me as calm, stable, easy to deal with. I took that as a compliment. I didn't realize it was also a warning. There's a subtle difference between peace and silence. Peace is chosen. Silence is learned. I learned mine well. Every time something mattered to me, I weighed it against the potential cost. Would this inconvenience someone? Would this change how I'm seen? Would this make things complicated? Most of the time, the answer didn't matter. I chose quiet instead. I told myself I was being mature. That not every feeling needed expression. That compromise was part of adulthood. But compromise, when it only moves in one direction, becomes disappearance. Years passed without friction. That should have felt like success. Instead, it felt like nothing. I didn't wake up unhappy. I woke up neutral. Days blended together not because they were busy, but because they were unremarkable. I fulfilled roles efficiently. I maintained relationships carefully. I was present everywhere except in myself. I noticed it first in conversations. People talked about their frustrations, their dreams, their regrets. When it was my turn, I gave summaries instead of truths. I'm good. Nothing new. Can't complain. Those phrases became shields. Not because I was lying but because the truth felt too abstract to explain. How do you tell someone you feel like you're fading while standing right in front of them at night, alone? The noise returned. Not panic. Not despair. Something quieter. A sense that my life was happening around me rather than through me. I started feeling like a placeholder. Someone occupying space without direction. Like a draft that never reached final form. I didn't feel trapped. That would have implied resistance. I felt absent. The scariest part was how normal it felt. Disappearance doesn't announce itself. It normalizes itself. You get used to not wanting too much. To not reacting strongly. To not imagining alternatives. You stop asking what you want because the answer feels distant and inconvenient. I told myself that desire fades with age, that intensity is something you outgrow. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't outgrown desire. I had trained myself to ignore it. I remember a moment small, almost forgettable that unsettled me deeply. Someone asked me what I was looking forward to. Not what I was doing next week. Not what I had planned. What I was genuinely looking forward to. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not because there was nothing in my life but because nothing felt like it belonged to me. That silence exposed something I had avoided for years. I wasn't choosing my life. I was maintaining it. And maintenance, without intention, slowly becomes decay. I hadn't left. I hadn't failed. I hadn't collapsed. I had simply learned how to exist without taking up space. And once I saw that clearly, I understood something terrifying. Disappearing doesn't require leaving your life behind. Sometimes, All it takes is staying too long without yourself. Once I recognized my disappearance, I couldn't unsee it. It was everywhere. In the way I spoke carefully, as if every sentence needed approval before it left my mouth. In how I smiled automatically, even when I felt nothing behind it. In how my first instinct was always to minimize my needs, my reactions, my presence. I had perfected the art of emotional invisibility. At first, I thought awareness would fix it. That noticing the problem would somehow reverse it. It didn't. Awareness only made the weight heavier. Because now I knew I was choosing this absence not consciously, but consistently. The moral dilemma didn't announce itself loudly. It whispered. If I stayed the way I was, life would remain smooth, predictable, undisturbed. People would continue to rely on me, appreciate me, trust me. If I changed, if I began taking up space, something would break. Not everything, but something. Expectations would shift. Relationships would strain. The calm I had carefully cultivated would fracture. And I had built my entire identity around not being the one who caused disruption. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years: is it selfish to want to be seen? The answer wasn't obvious. I had been praised for being easy, rewarded for being flexible, loved for being available. That kind of reinforcement is powerful. It teaches you that presence is conditional. So I stayed small. But staying small has a cost. I began to feel resentment creeping in, quiet, internal, directionless. Not toward others, but toward myself. I noticed how drained I felt after social interactions that were supposed to be comforting. How empty I felt after being needed. I wasn't tired because I was doing too much. I was tired because I was never being me. There was a moment when the internal tension became physical. I was sitting in a room full of people, laughter moving around me like background noise, and I suddenly felt detached from my own body. Like I was watching myself play a role I had memorized too well. That moment terrified me, because it felt like dissociation, not from trauma, but from prolonged self-erasure. I realized then that disappearing doesn't always feel sad. Sometimes it feels calm. And that calm can be deadly. I tried small acts of resistance. I paused before responding instead of replying instantly. I let my expression stay neutral when I disagreed. I allowed awkwardness to exist without smoothing it over. Each of these acts felt enormous. My heart raced as if I were doing something dangerous. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. I had trained my nervous system to associate self-expression with threat. The fear wasn't about rejection. It was about exposure. If I spoke honestly, people would see me not the polished, agreeable version, but the uncertain, imperfect one. And once seen, I couldn't retreat. That was the true cost of reappearing. There were nights when I lay awake imagining two futures. In one, I continued disappearing. Life remained calm. I aged quietly, respected, helpful, invisible. In the other, I disrupted the equilibrium. I disappointed people. I risked being misunderstood. That future felt frightening but alive. The realization hit me slowly: I wasn't afraid of conflict. I was afraid of existing without guarantees of acceptance. But acceptance bought at the cost of identity is not acceptance. It's tolerance. And I had tolerated my own absence for far too long. I understood then that staying invisible wasn't kindness anymore. It was self-neglect disguised as peace. And once that truth settled, something inside me began to resist more forcefully. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But persistently. I didn't know yet how to reappear. I didn't know what that would cost. All I knew was this: continuing to disappear felt more dangerous than the risk of being seen. I didn't reappear in a single moment. There was no announcement, no confession, no sudden transformation that made people stop and notice. Reappearing happened the same way disappearing had, slowly, almost invisibly. It began with resistance. Not dramatic resistance. Just the quiet refusal to erase myself automatically. I stopped answering questions with the safest possible version of the truth. I stopped softening my reactions to protect the room. I let my face show when something mattered to me, even if it made things uncomfortable. At first, it felt wrong. Not morally wrong, emotionally dangerous. My body reacted as if I were breaking a rule. My heart raced. My thoughts scattered. Years of disappearance had trained me well. Some people noticed immediately. Not because I became louder, but because I became less predictable. They asked if I was okay. If something was wrong. If I was going through something. I told them the truth in the simplest way I could: I'm trying to be here. That answer confused them more than silence ever had. A few relationships shifted. Not violently. Just subtly. The ones built on my availability weakened, the ones built on mutual presence held. That distinction hurt, but it clarified everything. I learned that being needed is not the same as being known. And being liked is not the same as being seen. There were moments when I wanted to retreat. When invisibility tempted me with its comfort and quiet approval. Those moments came when presence demanded courage. When honesty risked disappointment. When choosing myself meant letting someone else feel uneasy. But I remembered what disappearance had cost me. Not happiness. Identity. I hadn't been sad when I was disappearing. I had been empty. Presence, even when uncomfortable, felt heavier but real. I began to feel time again. Days stretched. Moments registered. Emotions returned with edges. Not all of them were pleasant. There was grief for the years I spent eluded. For the versions of myself that never had a chance to exist. I let that grief pass through me instead of burying it. Because grief, unlike numbness, proves that something still matters. I didn't become fearless. I still hesitate. I still choose silence sometimes. But now, silence is a choice, not a reflex. That difference changed everything. I no longer measure my life by how little trouble I cause. I measure it by how honestly I inhabit it. If you're listening to this and you feel like you've faded into a version of yourself that feels safe but hollow, I want to tell you to reappear dramatically. You don't need to. You don't have to burn your life down to exist within it. Start smaller. Pause before disappearing. Notice when you soften yourself unnecessarily. Let one honest reaction stand. Presence doesn't arrive as confidence. It arrives as permission. Permission to take up space. Permission to be inconvenient. Permission to be real. I didn't leave my life. I didn't start over. I simply stopped disappearing. And for the first time in a long time, I can feel myself here.